So, I welcome you back to another important lecture. And for today's class, we would be looking on toward that how come the beat of the heart is controlled. The other aspect that we would have a look on is that how the double pump circulation that we have in the human body and the single pump circulation that we have in the fish is carried on. We would also have a look on that how come the difference lies in between the thickness that we have for the atrias and the ventricles that we have in the body. For the previous lecture, that was in terms of the flow of the blood that we have in the heart. So we were utilizing or we were talking with context to each single atrias of the heart and the ventricles of the heart. And here we have to be seeing as that how come the heartbeat is controlled. So what we have to keep here in our mind is that between the atrias that we have in the heart and the ventricles that we have in the heart, so there would be a kind of a synchronization in between them, an association between them. By the synchronization, what we mean is that the time when the atrias would be contracting, so the right and the left atria, they both would do at the same time. They would both contract and relax at the same time. And when we talk about the ventricles of the heart, so for sure, again, we would see that they don't contract separately or individually, but rather than the right ventricle and the left ventricle that we have, so they would again be contracting at the same time. So if we were to split the heartbeat in terms of the steps, so we have got total of three steps with us. The first step or the first part of the heartbeat is the atrial systole, then there is this ventricular systole, and then comes this ventricular diastole with us. Wherever the word systole is coming, so this simply means contraction, and whenever the word diastole is coming, so this would simply mean the relaxation. So if I would say atrial systole, so both atrias would contract at the same time. When I would say ventricular systole, so both ventricles would contract at the same time. When I would say ventricular diastole, so both the ventricles of the heart, they would relax at the same time. So let us just try to see that what happens in the atrial systole. So when the atrial systole is happening, so the right atria and the left atria, they both would contract at the same time. From the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood would come into the right ventricle, and the oxygenated blood from the left atria would come into the left ventricle. And at this point, both the tricuspid valve on the right side and the bicuspid valve on the left side, they would open up at the same time. So this is how the atrial systole is being done. Now, if I move further, so here what we have got with us, so this is the second, you could say, event of the heartbeat, and this is entitled as the ventricular systole. And by the ventricular systole, what we mean is that the right ventricle and the left ventricle that we have with us, so they both would be contracting at the same time. The right ventricle would push the blood, the deoxygenated blood, into its respective pulmonary artery, and the left ventricle would push the blood into its aorta, and this would be happening at the same time. And when this ventricular systole is happening, so the tricuspid valve that we have and the bicuspid valve that we have, so they both close up, and the semilunar valves that we have coming here, so they would open up, and this would be preventing the backflow of the blood and would ensure that during the ventricular systole, the blood should flow only in one direction, and that is from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery, and from the left ventricle coming into the aorta, we say. What you have to see next is that when during the ventricular systole, the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve, when they close up, so the closure of these tricuspid and bicuspid, they would produce a lub sound of the heart. The heart has a lub and the dub sound. So the lub sound is by the closure of these valves that we have. Now the thing is that the pulmonary artery has received the blood and the aorta has received the blood in ventricular systole, and here the semilunar valves were open. Now, moving onward, when we have got this ventricular diastole to be considering, so in that scenario, the right ventricle that we have here and the left ventricle that we have here, so though these both chambers of the heart, they would relax at the same time. So when this ventricle and this ventricle then when they would be relaxing, so there is a possibility that the blood can backflow from the pulmonary artery into the right ventricle and it can backflow from the aorta into the left ventricle, but this is prevented by the closure of these semilunar valves. And when the closure of the semilunar walls happened during the ventricular diastole, so would now the heart produce the second of its functional sound, and that is a dub sound. So what you need to remember in terms of the description is that during the ventricular diastole, both ventricles relax at the same time. And there is a possibility of the backflow of the blood from the pulmonary artery into the right ventricle and from the aorta into the left ventricle, but this is prevented by the closure of semilunar wall. So this is how the heartbeat is controlled in the human body. That we have to be discussing about that okay, we have the human heart, and the human heart on the top have the atrias, and then on the lower side we have the ventricles, and the situation is that there lies a difference of the thickness between the atrias that we have in the heart and the ventricles that we have in the heart. If you were to see in the simplified diagram, the right atria and the left atria that I am showing you at the moment. So comparative to the ventricles that we have on the lower side, they have less thickness. Okay, the heart overall has a cardiac muscles in it. So at this point, the content or the amount of the cardiac muscle fibers that we have in case of the atrias is comparatively less compared to the underlying ventricles that we have got. And if we were to further see, so among the right ventricle and the left ventricle that we have with us, so the left ventricle has more of the thickness of its wall comparative to the thickness of the right ventricle. So if I were to summarize this, the ventricles overall have a greater thickness compared to the atrias. The atrias, on the other hand, has got less thickness comparative to their ventricles, and among the ventricles, the left ventricle is the most thickest. Now we have to justify it that why this is being done in case of the heart. The reason is that the right atria and the left atria they are only supposed to be sending the blood into their subsequent ventricles, and since these ventricles they are lying immediately below the atria, so they need not to have much thicker walls in them. And if I were to talk about the right ventricle, so why this has got more thickness of its wall comparative to the atrias, because this right ventricle has to send the blood toward the lungs with the help of the pulmonary arteries, and the lungs they are little bit more at a distance from these right ventricles. So that is why these right ventricles they need to have much thicker walls than the atrias. With respect to that, they are sending the blood at a little more of the distance. Now, the other situation is that why come this left ventricle that we have with us? So this has the thickest walls. The walls of the left ventricle are the thickest. The reason is that this left ventricle, when this would pump the blood, so it would go into the systemic circulation, where I have to make sure is that each and every part of my body should be receiving the oxygenated blood. So the pressure needs to be generated is immense. So since the left ventricle that we have is sending the blood to the body by the help of the systemic circulation, so with an intention to be generating the maximum of the pressure required to be sending the blood at every part, this left ventricle has developed the most thickest walls in the case of the heart. The other situation is that we need to be comparing that how come the human heart that we have with us, this is a kind of a double pump circulation. Why this is double pump circulation? Because when the heart beats for once, so the blood passes or flows through the heart twice. How this is being done? Because initially the blood is brought from the body to the right side of the heart, and from here the blood would go to the lungs and back to the left atria of the heart. The blood would come from the lungs. So this is the pulmonary circulation. Again, when the other way around is that from the left ventricle of the heart, the blood would go from the aorta and then it would be brought back toward the right atria of the heart in terms of the systemic circulation. So we see that in one heartbeat, the blood flows twice through the heart. So this is why the human heart tends to be following the double pump circulation. Because in one circuit, this flows between the heart and the lungs, and in the second circuit, it flows between the heart and the body and back to the heart. So this is an aspect of the double pump circulation. So if I were to show you this, if you see here, so here I have got the heart with me. And if I were to show you, so you see from here the blood, the deoxygenated blood is going to the lungs, and then the blood is again being brought back from the lungs to the heart. So this is one circuit, and this is the pulmonary circulation. On the other way around, in the second circuit, the blood would go, or it would be carried away from the left side of the heart. It would come toward the body, and from the body, this is going back again toward the heart. And this circuit of the blood is what we refer to this as the systemic circulation. Okay, so between the heart and the body is systemic, and between the heart and the lungs that we have got, so this would be the pulmonary circulation, and this makes the heart a double pump circulatory pump. On the other way around, we have got the single pump circulation in case of the fish, because in one circuit or in one heartbeat, the blood flows once through the heart. So how this is being carried in a fish, if you were to see here, so this is representing the supply of the blood to the body, and when the body tissues would be using up the oxygen out of the blood, it would become deoxygenated. So this deoxygenated blood is taken to the atria of the fish, and from there it would go to the ventricle of the fish, and from here the deoxygenated blood would be brought toward the gill capillaries, and in the gill capillaries the blood would become oxygenated. Now instead of going back toward the heart, the oxygenated blood is sent to the body tissues. So this means that in this regard, the pump or the flow of the blood in case of the fish is in a single circuit, not in a double circuit, as it happens in case of the human body. So if I were to further show you the situation that we have to be understanding here is that here we have the gill capillaries, here the blood has got oxygenated. Now this is going toward the fish systemic circulation, and here the tissues of the fish body have used up the oxygen and the blood has become deoxygenated. Now this is returned to the atrias, and from here it would go into the ventricles, and from here this is going toward the gill capillaries again. So this is an aspect of the single circulatory pump mechanism that we have got in case of the fish, we say. So I hope you would be clear with this double pump and the single pump circulation, and with the heartbeat, and why there happens to be the difference in between the thickness of the heart chamber. So see you for the next class.